Her bracelet was left in a narrow cave. No footprints, no sound. She was supposed to return from a short hike, but by nightfall, she was gone. That's how a familiar trail in the mountains turned into a sealed tomb. 10 years later, 3 hikers stumbled into the cave. At first, what they saw looked like a mummified figure. Detective Lane stared at her deep scars, and then the fragments of Maya's own voice. The words whispered in a cave that no one should have survived. He noticed a pattern everyone else had missed, and when he traced the shadows into the cave, the mountains revealed a darkness older than the trail itself. And what Maya endured in that underground prison shocked the whole town. Before we dive in, thanks for being here. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, let's get into the story. August 3rd in eastern Arizona still carried daytime warmth, but the evenings in the Red Cliff Mountains were already turning sharp, dropping shadows across the rocks earlier than usual. On that cool morning, Mesa archivist Maya Collins pulled into the Silver Pine Trail parking lot. Cameras later confirmed her car entering just minutes before she signed the visitor log. She parked in the second row near the information board, took a bottle of water, a light windbreaker, and a small backpack from her trunk, and walked toward a trail she knew better than most. Maya wasn't a beginner. She'd been hiking since she was young, and she returned to Silver Pine several times a year. The route was simple, low ascents, clear paths, open stretches between pines and scattered stone. Nothing about it suggested danger. Nothing about it explained what would happen next. Maya's habit of hiking the same trail repeatedly becomes important later when search teams realize what she should have recognized instantly. At about mid-morning, a descending hiker spotted her. He later told investigators she seemed perfectly composed, steady pace, confident steps, no confusion in her expression. She greeted him politely without stopping and continued uphill. That ordinary moment, barely 10 seconds long, became the final confirmed sighting of Maya Collins. And after that, silence. No more witnesses, no more footprints anyone could rely on. The next clue wouldn't come from the trail, but from something investigators found near her car. Something small enough to overlook, yet crucial enough to shift the entire search. Most people will scroll away and forget this ever happened. But not you. You have stayed. So please subscribe, because some mind-blowing stories are coming your way. The next hours were nothing but silence. Maya was supposed to be back in Mesa by evening. She had even arranged a brief call with her close friend Kelly Thomas. But when that hour passed and her phone went dark, Kelly waited, then began texting, then pacing. By late evening, worry overran patience. She finally contacted the Mesa Police Department, who relayed the case to the Pell County Sheriff's Office, the agency responsible for the Red Cliff Mountains. Just after midnight, the first rangers reached the trailhead. Maya's car sat exactly where she'd left it. Inside were her bag, keys, small flashlight, and folding knife, all routine items, but her phone remained on the seat, an odd detail. Friends admitted she sometimes left it behind to avoid distractions, but she normally carried it as a basic navigation tool. Investigators found no signs of a struggle, seats unmoved, windows untouched, everything orderly. Her habit of carrying her phone for navigation clashed strongly with what search teams would find deeper on the trail. Around the early morning hours, rangers began combing the upper sections of Silver Pine Trail. They swept from the trailhead toward the southward turn, scanning the darkness with thermal imagers. But the night was bitterly cold, and a still body gives off almost no heat. The search stretched toward dawn without a single result. By sunrise on August 4th, the sheriff's office declared a full-scale operation. Specialists from the Arizona Rescue Association arrived, along with dog teams and dozens of volunteers. On narrow ledges, searchers roped down ravines, checking every drop-off. Footmarks appeared along the Ryans as each section was cleared. Above them, 2 drones and a sheriff's helicopter traced patterns in the sky, feeding back high-resolution footage of the terrain. Yet despite the growing army of searchers and the widening grid, one detail stopped several volunteers in their tracks. A detail that suggested Maya might not have taken the path everyone assumed she did. That single discovery would shift the entire operation toward a place no one had searched yet. The search dogs caught a faint scent leading onto the trail, but it vanished just a few hundred yards from the start. One handler explained that the heavy daytime foot traffic likely wiped away the trail. Even so, other searchers found it strange. Dogs usually indicate at least a direction. Here, the scent didn't fade gradually. It simply stopped, as if Maya had stepped off the trail and disappeared into thin air. This sudden cutoff echoed the earlier problem with her abandoned phone, two details that suggested something interrupted her routine long before she reached the upper trail. In the days that followed, search teams expanded far beyond the official path. They moved through gullies, old stone outcroppings, dry stream beds, and side trails known mostly to local hunters. The terrain made tracking nearly impossible. The ground was hard. Rocks shifted after every rainstorm. But the more they searched, the clearer the situation became. There were no footprints, no broken brush, no dropped belongings, no trace of Maya Collins anywhere. On the seventh day, rescuers climbed into the high rocky sections above the trail, places casual hikers rarely attempt. They searched every narrow crevice, every hidden terrace, spots where lost hikers had been found in past rescues. But this time, nothing. No debris, no clothing, no remains. The mountain stayed silent. Maya's family arrived the day after she disappeared, joining volunteers, handing out flyers, and speaking with hikers who had been on the trail that same morning. No one had seen anything unusual. A few remembered lone men or small groups moving along the switchbacks, but no sightings matched Maya herself. And yet, just when the search seemed completely empty, one volunteer noticed something on a side path, a detail small enough to dismiss, but unsettling enough that the sheriff ordered the area sealed off. That unexplained find would pull investigators toward a theory no one wanted to consider, but could no longer ignore. After several weeks, the search was reduced to only a few rotating teams. Officially, the operation continued, but the heavy manpower was gone. In a press briefing, the Copperfield County Sheriff admitted that in almost every disappearance they handle, there is always something left behind. A torn strap, a piece of clothing, a scuff mark on rock that shows movement. But with Maya Collins there was nothing. No thread, no trail, no sign she ever made a mistake. It echoed the same pattern that began on day one, her scent trail breaking too suddenly, her phone left behind, her path vanishing without transition. By the end of October, the case was handed to the Department of Missing Persons. Off the record, several rescuers admitted that Maya's disappearance was different even compared to the other strange cases in the Red Cliffs. Usually, tracks lead somewhere into ravines, into unstable slopes, toward old overgrown trails. But here, there was no direction at all. No weather event, no fall zone, no human threat anyone could confirm. Maya Collins vanished on a sunny afternoon, on a familiar trail, surrounded by regular foot traffic, and yet nothing from the first frantic night to the end of the full-scale search brought investigators one step closer to her. The absence of clues gave the case a disturbing quality, as if something removed her from the landscape in a single clean moment. The first weeks were an exhausting cycle for her family and investigators alike. Every new lead carried hope. Every investigation ended in nothing. The active phase lasted about a month, and by then, law enforcement and volunteers had checked nearly every accessible mile around the Red Cliff Mountains. But just as the operation was being wound down, one final report crossed a detective's desk. A report that didn't match the official timeline at all. And when investigators followed up on that overlooked detail, it would reopen the case in a direction no one had expected. The Mesa Police Department, working alongside the Copperfield County Sheriff's Office, expanded the search far beyond the mountains. Officers checked hospitals in Mesa, Tempe, Chandler, Casa Grande, and every medical center that might have received an unidentified patient. Detectives personally walked through emergency rooms with Maya's photograph, asking nurses and on-call doctors if anyone resembled her. Nothing. No admissions, no close matches, no unknown woman who could have been her. Meanwhile, Units canvassed motels and campgrounds around Apache Junction and the small towns leading toward Salt Canyon. Managers said police left flyers and strict instructions to report any sighting. Guest logs were seized from several motels and reviewed line by line. Not a single entry hinted at her presence. Just like the empty trail, the empty logs and empty hospitals repeated the same pattern. Maya leaving no trace in places where she should have left at least one. Investigators then turned to her banking activity. With a warrant, they pulled her recent transactions. Nothing had moved since the morning she vanished. No gas purchases, no hotel payments, no ATM withdrawals. Not in Arizona, not anywhere else. One investigator told a local paper that this was the moment it felt like Maya hadn't just disappeared from the trail, but disappeared from the entire map. A week into the search, her family hired a private investigator, former police officer Arnold Scott from the Sunrise Security Agency. Working independently, he visited the Red Cliff Mountains almost daily. He spoke with tourists who had hiked between August 3rd and 4th, questioned hunters and ranchers in the remote outlying areas, and inspected places the official search teams considered unlikely. Old side paths, forgotten water routes, even abandoned mine shafts left from the region's mining era. But everywhere he searched, the result was the same, nothing at all. Despite the total lack of evidence, Maya's family pushed forward. During the first month, they organized several community searches in the Red Cliffs. Friends came, strangers came. People who had never met Maya showed up with backpacks and flashlights, but each new sweep spread farther out into terrain that made less and less sense. There was no path she should have taken on her own, no sign of an accident, nothing that explained why she hadn't come home. Just like the vanished scent trail and the empty guest logs, these widening searches only reinforced the same pattern. Maya leaving no trace in places where traces should exist. By late October, the official search was formally suspended. The Copperfield County Sheriff's Office notified the family with the standard language: no new leads, no actionable information. Operations paused, off the record. Seasoned rescuers said it was the most baffling disappearance they'd seen in years. Even in mountains famous for strange stories, someone always leaves something. A shoe print, a broken branch, a wrong turn. But not this time. Months later, the case quietly slipped into the cold category. Still open, but without active teams, new sweeps, or designated resources. A report filed at the end of April stated that the case had no factual anchor points and the probability of finding Maya alive was extremely low. Her family didn't hear this from detectives. They learned it from a Mesa Herald journalist who obtained the document through a public records request. Yet her parents refused to let the story freeze. Every year, on August 3rd, they gathered a small circle of friends and volunteers to hike Silver Pine Trail again, branching off the side paths she once walked with confidence. The tradition became symbolic, but it gave the family one thing the investigation no longer offered: purpose. In the case file, there is an audio recording from one of those yearly searches. Maya's mother says softly, "We don't know what happened to her, but we can't accept that she just vanished. People don't just disappear." If you are enjoying this story, kindly subscribe, cause more mind-chilling stories coming up in the days. At the Missing Persons Department, Maya's file slowly drifted toward the back of the cabinet. Within a year, 2 other tourist incidents occurred in the Red Cliffs, both tragic but both solved. Bodies recovered, causes known, and next to them, the Collins case looked even stranger. No clues, no direction, no logic at all. It echoed the same silent pattern that had followed the case from the first day: the sudden end of her scent trail, the empty logs, the untouched bank cards. Investigators had also spent those early months examining the possibility of a voluntary disappearance. They went through her finances, messages, work contacts, travel history, and interviewed those closest to her. A psychologist reviewed her emotional state. There were no indicators of depression, distress, secret plans, or preparations to leave. Maya had no reason to vanish. Nothing in her life pointed to escape. She simply disappeared in broad daylight on a trail surrounded by other hikers. As the months rolled forward, the case quieted. Her family held on through pure perseverance, even as uncertainty grew heavier. The Redcliffe Mountains remained unchanged, unmoved, indifferent, as if they had simply absorbed another person into their endless ridges. The family waited, the police waited, and the mountain gave nothing back. Then came August 25th. Falcon Creek Canyon was nearly deserted. With the hot season fading, tourists thinned out, and the scattered cave systems underneath the loose scree attracted only dedicated cavers. That morning, 3 members of the Canyon Explorers Club decided to enter a sector not officially open to the public. They didn't register their route, didn't notify rangers, and later admitted they saw it as a harmless off-map detour, just another thrill. Police records show the group consisted of 3 middle-aged men carrying only basic gear helmets with LED lights, ropes, carabiners, and light backpacks with water. The cave they chose was marked on maps as an unofficial branch cave, known for unstable pockets, vertical wells, and side tunnels that often led nowhere. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The passages were narrow but stable, with standard ledges and scree, and the air, while occasionally stagnant, remained within safe limits. Ryan Foster, who testified later, recalled a subtle tension at the start of the descent, a pressure he couldn't explain, similar to what he'd felt on a past rescue operation. Everything shifted when they entered a section cavers called a wallet, a low passage barely wider than a person's shoulders. After a few meters, a sloping shaft ran along the wall, leading to a small vertical drop. As Ryan prepared to lower himself, his light caught a glint at the bottom. At first, he assumed it was a lost carabiner or scrap of metal, but when he reached the base, he realized it was something far stranger, a thin bracelet woven from horsehair. The fibers were fresh, the weave intact, as if it had not been in the cave for long. The discovery unsettled the group. In caves like this, modern objects rarely appear, and yet here was something delicate, out of place. Just like Maya's vanished phone and her suddenly ending trail, the bracelet seemed to exist in a space where nothing should have survived. Instead of leaving, they pressed on, choosing one of 2 side passages branching from the upper gallery. The left tunnel looked wider, but the path forced them sideways, crawling low, flashlights almost brushing the floor. Minutes passed in tense silence before the passage opened sharply into a small grotto with a dry stone floor. In the quiet of that chamber, Ryan noticed something moving, or perhaps it wasn't moving at all, but the shadow didn't belong to any of them. Families wait, hope fading into dread. A single message glowing on a phone, and then nothing. Don't let your loved ones face the horror of uncertainty. Prepare now. Check the pinned comment and get the survival guide today. According to the reports, Foster was the first to step into the grotto. He lifted his lantern, letting the beam crawl across the rough stone walls, and froze. In the far corner sat a motionless shape. At first, he told investigators he assumed it was a fallen boulder. The shadows twisted strangely across its contours. But as he approached, the outlines resolved into something unmistakable, a human form. The lantern light fell across the face and reality hit. The 3 cavers realized immediately they were looking at a body. The figure was slumped against the uneven wall, knees drawn up, hands resting limply on the floor. Skin grey, almost translucent, hair long and matted, thin to the point of fragility. It looked mummified, as if it had been trapped in that corner for decades. None dared approach at once. In his statement, Foster recalled it looked like she had been sitting there for years, but then he noticed something that made his heart stop. The chest rose slightly. One breath, then another. The men hurried forward, lights focused on the face. The eyes were half open, pupils sluggish in the glow of their flashlights. The cheeks were hollowed by exhaustion. Yet she was alive, barely, but undeniably breathing. Investigators later praised the group's actions. They didn't touch her or try to move her. Oxygen levels in such galleries could drop quickly, so they retreated carefully toward the exit to summon help. With no signal underground, they climbed as fast as the cramped passage allowed, only managing to place the call once they reached an open canyon. Even after the call, Rescuers would arrive at a scene that made them question everything they thought they knew about the disappearance, because the woman's condition and the cave itself held secrets no one expected. The dispatcher's log recorded the panic in a single line. A man was yelling that they had found a person underground. He said she was barely moving. His voice was trembling. The alert was immediately forwarded to the Copperfield County Sheriff's Office and then relayed to the Arizona Rescue Service. The senior rescuer on site later admitted they did not expect anyone to be alive at that depth, much less a woman who had survived in a place so hostile to long-term occupancy. As the team prepared to descend before sunset, their plan relied entirely on the caver's detailed reports. Investigators would later highlight one unnerving detail. There were no foreign traces in the grotto, no belongings, no evidence she had wandered there, no clues suggesting how she could have arrived. She'd been sitting in a dead-end chamber with no other exit and no apparent path to get lost. The same pattern that had haunted Maya's disappearance, vanishing without a trace, was repeating, only now she had reappeared where logic said survival was impossible. While rescuers assembled their equipment and medical team on the surface, the cavers remained frozen in disbelief. One of them later said he kept questioning what he had seen, convinced for a moment that it wasn't a living person at all, but some shadow that, impossibly, still breathed. At that moment, none of them knew the woman's identity. None could have imagined that the fragile figure in the dim light was Maya Collins, missing for nearly a decade, and that she had somehow endured in total darkness for all those years. Rescuers reached Falcon Creek Canyon within minutes of the call. The senior specialist quickly realized that standard evacuation procedures would fail. The passage where Maya had been found was too narrow, the grotto too deep, and the slope too steep to transport a person on a stretcher the usual way. The team had to improvise a route almost from scratch, widening tight sections, reinforcing unstable rock, and installing temporary supports where even a light touch could trigger a collapse. Half an hour after arrival, the first medic descended into the grotto. He found Maya seated, breathing slowly, her pulse faint but steady. She looked like someone who had endured months or years without proper food, light, or movement. Her body temperature was dangerously low even for the cave's cold environment. Bruises, old calluses, and healed lacerations marked her shoulders and forearms. The medic performed no aggressive manipulations, knowing that any careless movement could worsen her injuries. He only shored up her back with small supports and signaled the surface team to prepare a stabilization stretcher. The meticulous care mirrored the precision that had marked the searches and rescues since the earliest days of Maya's disappearance. Every step measured, every clue handled with caution. The extraction began. Movements were painstakingly slow, inch by inch, with ropes constantly shifting loose stones. Rescuers rotated frequently to maintain control of tools and steady hands. In the narrow, cold passages, even the most experienced cavers shivered. There was no chaos, but a pervasive fear hung over the team. Everyone understood the stakes. One small misstep could endanger Maya, or themselves. And even as the first stretchers reached more stable ground, everyone knew this was only the beginning. The full story of how she had survived here, and what lay ahead for her once she left the cave, was still waiting to be uncovered. The climb to the surface took hours. Midway, rescuers had to assemble a temporary platform of metal rails they had brought after the initial survey. Maya was lifted in a semi-recumbent position, her head and limbs secured, because her body lacked the strength to hold itself upright. According to the report, she never vocalized pain, shifted her expression, or made a sound. By the time she reached the surface, it was late evening. A makeshift medical station was quickly set up at the canyon's edge. For the first time, doctors could examine her in normal light, transmitting vital information to the dispatcher immediately. Maya was in critical condition, her life clearly in jeopardy, and needed urgent transport to Mesa. Around midnight, a helicopter lifted off. The nurse who accompanied her described the patient as almost unresponsive. She did not react to voice, touch, or light. Her eyes were half open, pupils barely tracking. Her heart rate was irregular, teetering on the edge of stopping. The crew also noted the pungent smell of cave dust and traces of dried organic matter on her hair and hands, substances that were later sent for analysis. After years of disappearing without a trace, Maya's emergence from the grotto now mirrored the same impossible pattern. The absence of explanation followed by a shocking, almost unbelievable discovery. Canyon Ridge Medical Center received her early the next morning. The first examination revealed profound exhaustion, severe hypothermia, chronic dehydration, and vitamin deficiencies consistent with prolonged absence from sunlight. X-rays showed multiple old fractures, ribs, wrist, ulna, that had never healed properly. Doctors concluded these injuries were not accidental. They had occurred at different times. Her body bore telltale signs of long confinement. Abrasions on her skin suggested constant pressure against hard surfaces. Fingertips were cracked, the epidermis peeling in places. Nails were brittle, scratched to bleeding, as if she had repeatedly tried to claw her way out of a confined space. Every detail painted a picture of endurance beyond belief, survival in conditions no one could imagine. And yet, even with her safely under medical care, one question remained. How had Maya Collins survived for nearly a decade in such impossible conditions, and what had happened to her during all those lost years? The analysis of the cave dust and organic matter hinted at answers, but the results would reveal something that contradicted every assumption investigators had ever made about her disappearance. Maya's mental state was assessed separately. The psychiatrist's report noted, "The patient demonstrates an almost complete lack of response to external stimuli. Stupor, gaze unfocused, no emotional response." In one of the detailed observations, Maya had tried to close her eyes several times when exposed to bright light, but the reactions were weak and inconsistent. She did not respond to voices or follow simple instructions. Psychiatrists suspected deep dissociation, a condition seen in people subjected to prolonged isolation, total darkness, and complete deprivation of social contact. This mirrored the impossibility of her disappearance itself. Her trail had vanished for years, and now, even in rescue, her mind reflected the same incomprehensible absence. Doctors braced for the worst. Even with intensive care and resuscitation, restoring her vital functions was uncertain. A morning consultation discussed the chance of long-term treatment and rehabilitation if she survived the coming hours. One physician wrote in an internal note, "She looked as if her body was alive, but her consciousness had long since left." It was clear that Maya had endured far beyond what any human could tolerate, trapped in darkness so long that her mind seemed to have blurred the line between order and chaos. Something, or someone, had kept her confined long enough to erase the normal mark of time and thought. Detective Victor Lane arrived at the canyon the morning after her evacuation, a veteran of the Major Crimes Unit with years of experience in Maricopa Desert disappearances. He was stunned. As he wrote in his report, he had never encountered a case where a person had been found several feet underground, alive, yet almost entirely cut off from the world. Even Lane, seasoned and skeptical, could not explain how Maya had survived, or why no one had ever noticed the signs of life in the deep grotto before that day. And as the investigation shifted from rescue to questioning, every shred of evidence, the bracelet, the cave dust, the mysterious survival, hinted at forces and circumstances no one had considered possible, setting the stage for discoveries that would rewrite everything known about her disappearance. The team of experts descended into the cave in 2 stages. The first was a brief walkthrough of the route the rescuers had used the previous day to bring Maya to the surface. The second stage was a painstaking survey of every item in the grotto. According to the report, extreme caution was required. Even a minor misstep could destroy critical evidence. Once the lights were fully set up, the grotto revealed itself to be far larger than the cavers had initially thought. In the glow of the lamps, the scene sent chills through the team, despite the stone's stable temperature. On the stone floor lay an improvised bed. Moss, lichens, and thin dried roots were gathered into a dense, orderly layer. Pressure victors showed it had been used for a long time. Unlike a chaotic heap, the bed was carefully arranged, as if its occupant had deliberately maintained a sense of order, even in extreme isolation. Across the grotto, a structure of stones formed a kind of reservoir to catch dripping water from the ceiling. The stones were lined with a thin layer of sand, etched with micro-ditches that guided the moisture into the collection area. The system suggested not just survival, but knowledge. Someone had learned how to manage limited water over a prolonged period. The meticulous arrangement mirrored the precision seen in Maya's survival. Her body had endured, and now the grotto showed that her mind had found ways to impose order even in total darkness. Nearby, a neat pile of small bones was discovered. They were clearly from rodents, likely pack rats, common to the Arizona mountains. Many were fractured, broken deliberately to access the brain, the only part nutritionally viable in such circumstances. The experts noted this was a survival strategy rarely seen, a grim indication of how the occupant had sustained life in near-total isolation. The deeper the team explored, the more it became clear that someone had not only survived in this cave, but had done so with an intelligence and routine that defied belief. And as the forensic team documented every detail, one question lingered. If this was Maya Collins's work, how had she acquired the knowledge and will to maintain life in a place no one had thought capable of supporting it? Nearby, the team discovered an item that finally confirmed Maya had been living in the grotto for an extended period. A small backpack, immediately recognizable by its worn bottom and color matching the description provided by her family. Inside was a notebook, swollen and water-damaged, along with a pen whose rubber grip was worn smooth. The experts did not open the notebook on sight. The paper was so fragile that even a slight breeze could destroy it. It was carefully secured in a special container and transported to the laboratory, where, under controlled conditions, individual pages could be examined. Most of the writing had been washed away, but a few fragments remained legible. One page contained a primitive schematic of the cave, drawn with a trembling hand. Curved lines traced the passages, and on the right side was a Victor Passage B. An arrow pointed to what appeared to be the only route to the surface. Underneath it, a short inscription read, "It doesn't work." He blocked the entrance. Experts immediately noted the uneven pressure of the pen, signs of extreme fatigue or severe psychological distress. From the moment the notebook was examined, the word he became the focus of investigation. Just as Maya's initial disappearance left no trace, this cryptic note hinted at a presence or force that had interfered with her ability to leave the cave. Detective Lane wrote in his report, "Any mention of a third party in a confined space where there is no sign of recent access is highly suspicious. If someone blocks the exit, it implies the ability to come and go freely." Further inspection of the grotto confirmed troubling details. Scuff victors were found along the walls at shoulder height. They were not random but repeated, clearly made by someone traversing the same route multiple times. Yet the pattern did not match Maya's size or movement. The victors were too even, too forceful, suggesting a hand and strength different from hers. For the first time, it became clear that Maya had not been entirely alone, and that someone or something had been controlling her environment in ways investigators could barely imagine. And as forensic teams prepared to examine the scuff victors and compare them with other traces in the cave, one pressing question loomed. Who or what had been there with her, unseen for all those years? When the rubble underneath the cave's passage was examined, the geologist immediately noticed something unusual. The stones weren't naturally settled. Several fragments bore scratches that clearly came from tools. One piece even carried traces of a clay and sand mixture absent from the surrounding area, implying someone had transported it from outside. Detective Lane flagged another unsettling observation. Nothing in the grotto seemed out of place except for Maya herself. No discarded equipment, no litter, no evidence of a visitor. If someone else had been present, they had left the space immaculately clean. An internal report noted, this cave was not used as a temporary shelter, but as a sustained living space. Whether that was voluntary remains unclear. The same meticulous order that shaped Maya's moss and root bed, her water collection system, and the neatly piled rodent bones now hinted at a hidden presence, moving unseen yet leaving no trace. From these details, Lane began shaping a working theory. Maya hadn't wandered in by accident. Someone, stronger, more capable of navigating the cave, knew the passages and had controlled the only exit. But the most baffling question remained: how could she endure so long in complete darkness without nourishment or the most basic provisions? The answer would emerge only after more in-depth study. One thing was already clear: this was far from a standard disappearance. In the early days after her stabilization, Maya remained largely unresponsive. She lay motionless for hours, ignoring voices, light, and touch. Weeks passed before the first signs of life appeared: tiny hand movements, brief attempts to focus her eyes, fleeting reactions to illumination. Psychiatrists described it as short circuits of awareness, moments when she seemed present before slipping back into a profound internal silence. Even with these initial signs, no one could explain what had sustained her for years, or why the cave had been arranged with such careful, almost deliberate precision. And as the forensic and psychiatric teams prepared to examine her surroundings, every trace of the grotto, including the faint tool victors and oddly positioned debris, hinted at a presence or force that had shaped her survival in ways the investigators had yet to grasp. The first words Maya spoke were barely audible, a whisper so faint it sounded almost like someone muttering to themselves. Her voice was slurred, warped by months of isolation and exhaustion. For days, psychologists recorded every fragment, sometimes without fully understanding the context. The memories came in pieces, obsessive and incomplete, repeating in cycles. It was from these scattered fragments that Detective Lane would later reconstruct the first coherent outline of what had happened. The careful attention to small details in her recounting mirrored the meticulous order she had maintained in the grotto. The bed, the water reservoir, the neatly stacked rodent bones, traces of survival in both mind and body. Through broken sentences, Maya described the day she vanished. She had tried to shorten her usual route along the trail, spotting a convenient ledge that promised a quicker vantage point. As she climbed, the ground beneath her gave way. She fell, striking her head hard. After that, everything went blank. Consciousness slipped away like sand through fingers. When she awoke, she was crammed into a small cavity deep underground. Light was nearly non-existent, only a faint glow from a narrow passage far within the cave. She tried to move toward it, but the darkness disoriented her. The soft drip of water echoed in the confined space, and she could feel an almost imperceptible movement of air. Her initial attempts to escape stretched on for what seemed like hours. Crawling along jagged walls guided by the cold stone and the quiet sound of flowing water, she repeatedly ran into dead ends. The passages twisted and branched. Several times she returned to the same spot without realizing it. With each turn and narrow corridor, she became more lost, the cave seeming to fold back on itself, hiding secrets that no one on the surface could have imagined. And while her body endured in the darkness, her mind began to register something else. Signs that she was not entirely alone, that the presence she had sensed in the cave may have been watching, shaping the path she could take, even before anyone knew she was there. It was then that the footsteps began. Maya's recollection of this part was fragmented, as if she were afraid to reveal it fully. The psychologists noted her hesitation, the way she spoke in half sentences. The footsteps were quiet, deliberate, and unyielding. At first, she whispered, "My mind thought they were echoes, but then I realized they were coming closer." She could not see his face in the darkness, only sensing the air shifting as he approached. He carried something that glowed faintly, a small lantern casting a yellow light, but never shone it on himself. He offered her a drink first. The water was icy, with a metallic tang that made her recoil, yet she drank. Then he brought her something wrapped in cloth, roots or scraps she couldn't quite identify. At the time, she felt it was an act of salvation, though inexplicable. After that, her memory blurred. Only after multiple sessions could she recall what came next in her first attempt to escape. A stone blocked her path. He dragged it, she said, voice barely audible, For a long time, silently, she remembered him calling himself the Guardian. Sometimes she used the word keeper, as if it had survived independently in her memory. She was uncertain whether she had truly heard it or imagined it, yet she repeated it with strange clarity. He visited irregularly, leaving food, roots, occasionally small rodents. At first she refused them, but days without sustenance forced her to eat. Everything about his care was methodical, calm, unquestioning, yet imbued with control. Even after months underground, Maya could sense he had watched her, guiding her movements, shaping her survival, and somehow remaining invisible in the cave's shadows. And while she slowly regained fragments of consciousness on the surface, investigators were left with a chilling question. Who or what was this Guardian, and what had drawn him to the depths of a cave no one else ever entered? She spoke about the water he gathered for her, how he redirected thin drips from the ceiling into a stone gutter he had shaped by hand. Sometimes, she said, she could hear him breathing nearby. She never saw his face, never even a silhouette, but there were moments when the air shifted in a way that told her he was only inches away. And yet, he never touched. What frightened her most were not his visits, but the stretches when he vanished. Maya said that the silence in those periods was not simply quiet, it became something dense, something she could feel pressing against her. Days without sound dissolved her sense of time. Hours stretched, collapsed, and folded over one another until she no longer knew when she last slept, last ate, or last moved. According to the psychologists, these were the intervals when her mind first began to fracture. Whenever doctors gently asked her how long she believed she had been down there, her answer was always the same: a very long time. She could offer nothing more specific. Her inner sense of duration had disintegrated completely. Detective Lane later wrote that this detail unsettled him more than any physical evidence. A woman who vanished in broad daylight from a trail filled with hikers had effectively lived outside the normal flow of time. Psychiatrists noted that Maya hadn't survived because of resilience. She had survived because the deeper parts of her identity slowly dulled themselves. The darkness took her routines, her reasoning, her ability to measure anything. Her thoughts shrank to instinct alone. She stopped trying to escape, not because she accepted her fate, but because in the total absence of light and sound, the idea of escape lost meaning. She referred to the rest of her memories as if they belonged to someone else, as if she were recounting a dream that didn't fit inside her own mind. But there was one line she repeated every time, without hesitation, without confusion, as if engraved into the last intact corner of her consciousness. He wouldn't let me leave. Detective Victor Lane began developing a new approach to the case once Maya could form her first coherent statements about the man in the dark. In an internal memo, he described these words as a turning point, victoring the shift from viewing the disappearance as an accident to considering it a deliberate act. It was at this stage that a name surfaced, one that had long lingered only as a shadow in the records of old geological companies: Cain Adam. The process of identifying the Guardian relied on analyzing the details Maya could recall. Her memories were fragmented, yet certain images were repeated: a man who moved silently, someone who navigated the caves as though he were familiar with every passage, and a person capable of physically demanding actions, carrying stones, systematically blocking passages, and collecting water from difficult spots. Lane consulted the archives of the Western Geoservices Company, which had conducted geological research in the Red Cliff Mountains during the 1970s. Among reports and personnel records, he located a file for an engineer who matched the description. Cain Adam had worked for the company for several years. Colleagues described him as a highly skilled specialist, knowledgeable about rock formations, experienced in cave systems, and capable of moving through darkness without any equipment. Archival records included notes about Adam's unusual behavior. A former supervisor, interviewed by phone, said that Adam spoke obsessively about underground systems and had developed a theory predicting a future man-made collapse, in which only those prepared to live underground would survive. Company documents recorded his dismissal roughly 10 years before Maya's disappearance, citing vague reasons, violations of work discipline, and dangerous paranoid behavior. After that, Adam Trail largely vanished. Local residents interviewed by police reported occasional sightings of a man in remote parts of the mountains, carrying a backpack and an old altimeter on his belt. Some described him as a hermit or a recluse. Others called him a savage, though no one considered him a direct threat. Lane consulted the State Geological Survey, which provided decades-old maps of underground fissures and technical passages. Several of these passages overlapped with the area where Maya was later found. A geologist who had worked in the region suggested that Adam may have known of unofficial cavities absent from public records, allowing him to move underground as though navigating a private labyrinth. The police organized a new operation, this time focused on locating possible hiding places rather than rescue. They employed radio sensors, cavity scanners, and the assistance of experienced cavers mapping uncharted areas. Over the course of a week, they discovered remains of temporary campsites, traces of small fires, empty cans, and pieces of cloth used as makeshift shelter from the elements. The most significant discovery occurred early the following week. In a remote section of Silent Ridge Canyon, largely avoided due to its difficult terrain, investigators found a hidden camp. It consisted of a small tent, an old tarpaulin, and a crude stone shelter. According to reports, the site appeared abandoned in haste. Some items were scattered, and the ground beneath the tent bore fresh footprints. Several objects inside immediately drew attention. Small metal boxes containing dried roots, pieces of cloth with traces of soil, an old lantern with a yellowed light, and several rope-bound notebooks. The notebooks proved crucial in understanding Adam's recent activities. Experts described them as observation diaries, containing short handwritten notes, often uneven, sometimes harsh, and occasionally appearing as if written in darkness. The texts documented movements of tourists in the Red Cliff area, the placement of route marks, and the times when trails were least busy. Some entries were dated with descriptive phrases rather than numbers: August, hot after a rainstorm, or cold nights. A second section of the diaries was particularly disturbing. Adam outlined a concept of a new race adapted to life without sunlight, referring to himself as an overseer or keeper of order. The people he observed on the trails were noted as potential candidates. In several passages he referenced a student who endured darkness better than others, which investigators concluded referred to Maya. While the diaries did not detail the methods of confinement, several phrases closely matched Maya's account. One entry read, "She's still afraid of the dark, but the dark will teach her." Another stated, "Pass B is closed. No one should disturb the balance." These notes confirmed a direct connection between Adam and Maya's ordeal. Police teams conducted an extensive search for Kane Adam, examining every ravine and technical passage in the canyon that led deep into the rock formations. Units with search dogs covered several miles, but the scent trail ended abruptly at a cliff where only old shoe prints and a displaced stone remained. Hikers suggested he might have descended one of the deep vertical shafts, the kind that lead into unexplored areas. For an ordinary person, this would have been fatal, but for Adam, who had spent years living in such environments, it could have provided a hidden escape. Official statements from law enforcement indicated that Adam's whereabouts were unknown, yet unofficially, detectives believed otherwise. He had vanished into the very terrain he had mastered, and no confirmed sightings followed. Among locals, stories circulated of faint yellow lights or footsteps in the gorges at night, though none could be verified. Detective Lane summarized the operation in a late fall report. "We found his world, but not him. He remains a shadow, a ghost shaped by this landscape, capable of vanishing as completely as Maya once did." Medical reports prepared during the first months after Maya Collins' return documented a slow and fragile reintegration into daily life. Her physical reactions remained sluggish, and even brief walks across the ward required multiple pauses for rest. Weight gain occurred only gradually and inconsistently, and her body sometimes resisted normal rhythms, reflecting the extended period of extreme deprivation she had endured. Psychologists noted that Maya frequently scanned the corners of a room with her eyes, as if checking for hidden threats. In the first months, she could not tolerate darkened corridors and insisted on leaving doors open, even at night. A nurse in the rehabilitation unit recalled that Maya would wake suddenly, screaming, unable to explain her dreams, often repeating only the word he. Following recommendations from her therapists, Maya was enrolled in a long-term recovery program, focused on the effects of prolonged isolation. One specialist wrote, "The patient exhibits reactions typical of individuals deprived of sensory input for extended periods. The absence of light has left a lasting impact on her cognitive functioning. She experienced frequent nighttime panic episodes and severe claustrophobia. Even routine procedures, such as a CT scan, caused her to resist entering confined spaces, citing the pressure of stone as a trigger, forcing doctors to cancel some examination. Despite these challenges, her recovery progressed gradually. Her family provided constant support, though they acknowledged that Maya had changed. Her speech remained restrained, her spatial awareness was altered, and her focus was inconsistent. Her mother described how Maya would sometimes sit for hours by a window, observing the way sunlight shifted across the floor, as if studying its movement. The search for Kane Adam was classified as a long-term operation. In public comments, the Ironwood County Sheriff stated, "We have no reason to believe he is dead. We have no reason to believe he has left the state." Local newspapers occasionally ran stories about the elusive cave hermit, but no new sightings were reported. Several additional search operations were conducted in the Red Cliff Mountains without success. Speleologists involved in the searches noted that the underground network was complex, hazardous, and largely unmapped. Many passages were considered too dangerous even for experienced explorers. Following Maya's case, the Arizona National Park Service undertook a major revision of its missing persons protocols. Changes included mandatory checks of nearby cave systems, stricter monitoring of route registration, and updated procedures for work in remote canyons. An official statement read, "The Collins case has demonstrated that remote cavities can harbor individuals outside societal control and with unpredictable behavior." The Red Cliff Mountains, long regarded with caution, gained an added layer of foreboding. Tourists who once hiked alone began to prefer group excursions, while some locals said Maya's disappearance had given the mountains a voice, a reminder that this terrain does not forgive mistake. Maya's return to life was slow and cautious. Doctors observed gradual improvements, but they warned that the psychological scars from her ordeal might never fully fade. She learned to coexist with them much as she had learned to survive in the darkness underground, quietly, without words, simply accepting that her world had changed. Her family avoided mentioning the Red Cliff Mountains around her. Her father recalled her once saying that hearing about the area made her feel the shadow of a stone, a metaphor that neither doctors nor psychologists could fully interpret. The official case of Maya Collins's abduction remains open. The files contain dozens of photographs, copies of Adam diaries, cave analyses, maps, and interrogation reports. Yet the central document, the final report, was never completed, as the sheriff's office cannot close a case with no conclusion. For Maya, the truth was simpler. She survived, but her doctors noted that a part of her remained with the stone. In the silence and darkness of the cave, the shadow of those years persisted, a lingering presence in her life. Though Kane Adam was never found, the Victor he left in the dungeon continues to exist independently, almost as tangible as the stone that once blocked her path. Notably, investigators confirmed that there was not a single object in the grotto that did not belong to Maya. If you enjoy more of these stories, kindly subscribe. Thank you, and see you next time.